Wow. So joining me today is Anthony Migchels, an old friend of mine. We've never met before until today, and what a fantastic opportunity it's been to see you, Anthony. Great to see you.
Absolutely. Likewise, Lawrence.
Cool.
Yeah.
So we're currently on a bit of an adventure through the lowlands, is it?
Yeah, the Low Countries.
The Low
Yeah.
Countries,
Yeah.
Benelux. And we did Matthias Desmet yesterday, and Anthony kindly came to meet us in
Roosendaal.
Roosendaal, yeah, which is like a little border town between Belgium and the Netherlands, and we found a nice little spot here in the town centre. We're enjoying some Dutch beer, yeah.
Well, Belgium, but
Belgian beer, okay, right, but a little bit stronger than the beer back home, and let's see how this helps the podcast go along a little bit smoothly. Yeah, so how we know each other, we go back quite a long way, and I think we first started discussing ideas of monetary issues and currency. Must have been about 2014, maybe.
yeah.
Yeah, and I remember when I went through a particularly challenging period in which I was attacked by, various forces and the media and stuff, and you were one of the guys that stood by me, and I'll never forget that. Yeah, it was because that was a real moment of truth for me. Well, who's still standing? Who's still in the crew? And you were one of them, and it was always a great honor to me, and I always, thank you for that.
That's good to hear.
Yeah, and we've had lots of discussions over the years, haven't we, about various monetary issues, and that's what you're famous for. Is you have a blog called Real Currencies?
Yes.
Yeah, and you focused on usury, interest-free currencies, the history of central banking, and you've made fantastic blogs, really insightful posts about what's really going on with the monetary supply and the whole bigger agenda behind the scenes. And I know now you've got your own currency in Holland, which is
the Florijn.
I wasn't going to mangle that word, so I thought I'd best leave it for you. The Florijn. Yeah, and the Florijn is unique in Holland because it's an interest-free currency.
Yeah.
Yeah. We'll talk about that, I think, a little bit later on, but I think we should begin this discussion with a topic that seems to be red hot at the moment and is on the tip of everyone's tongue, and is creating quite a lot of frustration and anger and fury across the West, which is inflation.
Yeah.
Now, we're told constantly that inflation is running away with 8%, 9%, but that's only for currency inflation. There's also asset inflation that we don't know about. Now, generally, people don't really understand what inflation is, other than they go to shops. The products that they were buying a week before have now increased 10%, 20%, but wages haven't. So I think that's probably a good place for us to begin. Anthony, could you tell us what's going on? What the hell is going on with inflation?
Yeah. Let me tell you what's going on. And basically what's going on is that the credit crunch has returned. And this basically happened in September 2019. And there was a financial crisis at the repo market in September 2019. And that's when the money printing in the United States restarted. And that's also what I'd been waiting for years, because as a monetary reformer, I've been aware that the credit crunch was going to come back with a vengeance at some point. And I always knew that the shit was going to hit the fan when the money printing in the United States was going to be restarted. So that happened in September 2019. And then in March, they gave the bank a mega bailout, because it's also good to understand that the lockdown started in the weekend that the bank got a $4 trillion bailout. So these guys, obviously, they create all the problems, and then they give them a bag of money as a reward.
Mm-hmm.
So and people don't like that. People don't like bailouts for banks. We had Occupy Wall Street in the aftermath of the credit crunch in 10 years ago or so, and to prevent that, that's why they locked us down. That's basically what actually happened. And what's the problem with the credit crunch? We have this fiat system. I don't really like that term, but I'll use it because people know what I mean. Banks can create money when you take out a loan, and in this particular system, money has to grow about 8% per year. And if money has to grow with 8% per year, then debt must grow with 8% per year, because our money is debt. And over the last 50 years, debt has been growing exponentially with this 8% rate. And exponential growth, I can show you on the camera here. It looks something like this. And this is the graph of exponential
To the
growth.
moon.
And in the early stages, it goes easy, then it goes quicker and quicker, and then at some point, it becomes really steep. And if you look at the debt graph of the United States and the West, it looks exactly like this. And we're now in the very steep phase, and it's now completely unsustainable. Debt growth in the West is completely unsustainable. But if it doesn't grow, then we have deflation. I won't go into that too deeply. But
Well, I think deflation is an important topic for us to discuss. But before we get there,
yeah,
for laymen who don't have an idea about monetary policy, is inflation simply printing more money?
yeah, this is very important. We get manipulated with words, so they manipulate the meaning of words. And inflation originally meant a rising money supply, a growing money supply, and this is very important to understand. Later, it was turned into rising prices, but rising prices is a result of growing money. And that's very important because they want to confuse you with this.
Mm-hmm.
But what's going on is if you have this is our money growth. So that's pure inflation. We have had pure inflation for 50 years now with growing debt in the West since.
So just pumping more money into the economy, printing more money, that's inflation.
And then what happened in 2020 is that the economy could no longer take on enough debt to keep this 8% money growth per year in the West going. And that's why the Federal Reserve had to step in to keep this growth going. Otherwise, we're just going to have a deflationary collapse immediately. So that's when they started printing this money, but they printed too much. And they did this on purpose because they know exactly how much they needed to print because there are no accidents in banking.
Mm-hmm.
But they did this, and this resulted in asset price inflation. So real estate went through the roof.
So there's two types of inflation. There's currency inflation and there's asset inflation.
Yeah,
is there much of a difference between the two, or is it basically the same concept?
Yeah. You have basically two economies. You have the financial economy where all the speculation takes place, the stock exchange, all that kind of stuff, the making with money with money schemes, basically. And you have the real economy where people work. And the financial economy exists to just
the work one.
Yeah. You know, all the production takes place in the real economy, and the financial guys, they're in the business of raking in this production and disowning the working people and the entrepreneurs of their production. And what they have managed to do with quantitative easing over the last 15 years or so, ever since the crunch started in 2008. Is that they print money, but it all goes into the financial system. It doesn't really leak into the real economy. The real economy remains strapped for cash always.
Because that's what we're told, isn't it? That the quantitative easing will give the banks liquidity, which then trickles down into the economy that we use. But we never see that money.
No. The very lame story is we need to bail out the banks so that they can keep lending and provide money to the real economy. But if you're going to print trillions and trillions and trillions, you might as well give it directly to the people. You know, they could have done that as well. But obviously, we're not part of the club, so the money goes to the club. That's the way it is. But they kept the money in the financial system and in the making money with money scene. So the asset prices go up while the real economy has normal prices. But now what we're seeing is that for all sorts of reasons, prices in the real economy are also rising. But that's not really inflation because that remains in the financial system. But that is more driven by energy prices. That's another way that bankers can create rising prices in the economy. This is a historical thing that every major recession starts with rising energy prices, and they control all prices. So with speculation and with bringing more money into that market, or with supply shocks, as we're seeing now. I mean, Putin invades the Ukraine. The European Union shoots itself in the head with energy boycotts or sanctions against Russia, as a result of which we can't import gas anymore. We need that gas. Gas prices in Europe are now completely over the top.
Yeah.
So for producers, if you look at the producer price index in Germany, that's now up 30% over May. That's disastrous. But it's all due to rising energy prices.
Mm-hmm.
So that's semi-complex. It's money printing in the financial system, but in the real economy, the rising prices are mostly driven by rising energy prices.
A control of the supply and increasing the demand.
Yeah.
You know, like they do with diamonds. They sit on a mountain of diamonds and release them slowly to increase the price. Yeah.
All these prices are manipulated and controlled.
Yeah. So if inflation is by design and not by accident, then who is designing it and what is the ultimate purpose? Because runaway inflation ultimately will lead to an economic collapse because people simply can't afford the goods and services that are being offered, amongst the economy. Just,
Mhm.
they stop consuming, don't they? Which is what ultimately they need to maintain this system. So who is designing it, and what do you think is the end game?
The larger picture is, the wider picture is that there's been a world government behind the scenes for decades already, but we're now what has started with when the money printing started again in September 2019 is the open manifestation of that world government. Within 10 years, before the end of this decade, I expect that there will be an open world government, and the main resistance against this world government are the Western states, and not the states, but the peoples of the West. We are used to a certain level of consumption here, a certain standard of living, a certain standard of human rights, and the world government will be by and for bankers, and it will be a terrible tyranny. So it's going to be extremely unpleasant, and they need to destroy this opposition in the West against this world government, because there's nobody in the West who's going to vote for a world government. So what is coming now in the West is first we have this inflation, but this
Okay,
will...
I just want to hang on until I think we're speaking underneath a church, and it's decided to ring some bells as we're chatting. So we'll just hang on until the bells ring. It might be a good omen, I think.
Yeah. Let's see how long this lasts.
Before I walked past here before, and they were playing. There's like a snooker tune. I've never heard a church do that before. So yeah, I think we'll wait till that finishes. We might get another hour or half an hour before the next tune comes along. Do you want to wind it back to?
Yeah. So that was it. Yeah, that was it. We're heading now for this open world government, and they have to do, like I said, the opposition comes from the Western peoples in the West. We have human rights here. We have a certain standard of living. That's all anathema to the coming world government. We all have to be brought down to say something like Brazil level or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And what we're having now is first inflation because of all the money printing in the United States, and that has gone too far. And of course, like I said, because of the energy situation. But soon they will be using this inflation to sell what they really want, which is deflation. There's going to be a huge change in the monetary system soon. This debt growth, which is simply unsustainable, is going to be stopped at some point, and it's not long from now either.
Mm.
So
that's interesting. The deflation now. Inflation is an esoteric subject, but deflation is even more esoteric. And how I understand it from a layman's point of view is that inflation simply means inflating the currency by printing more cash. Therefore, it makes money cheap.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because the liquidity in the economy is high, and therefore it's easy for people to trade.
Exactly.
Because there's lots of liquidity. But deflation, which is almost never talked about, is the opposite, where they remove currency from the economy,
Yeah.
and therefore the ability to trade becomes more difficult. Defaults happen, and then the banks who lent money in the first place to a business step in and take the real asset, through the deflationary process.
Exactly. Very much so. And
yeah.
The main thing is what you said about how there's going to be a scarcity of liquidity in the economy. As a result, there's not enough money to have to finance everything, and that results into unemployment, bankruptcies of all sorts of businesses, and indeed asset prices on a very low level, with nobody having any money to pick them up,
except bankers,
except for the filthy rich,
Yeah.
who run the banks and who create these inflations and deflations. So, and you must realize that the Great Depression was a deflation with 70%. Between 29 and 33, the money supply in the United States went down 70%, and that caused the Great Depression. That was the key cause of the Great Depression, and that's what's coming to the West as well.
Mm-hmm.
So,
how does that benefit? How does a deflationary period benefit the bankers? I mean, what do they seek to gain from crashing and destroying the economy? Is it so they can buy assets cheap? No, what is it?
This is genocide. What is now coming? I don't want to create a panic or whatever, but I take a very grim view of the perspectives of the West in the coming years. What they have done with this 300 trillion debt bubble that we now have, because that's what world debt currently stands at, 300 trillion. That's 1 3 with 14 zeros behind it. Can never be paid off.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody knew it was never going to get paid off. Anybody with a clue anyway. And why did they let it happen? Because this is a this is basically nuclear warfare with financial means. What they have dropped a bomb on us now in the West, and
this is the fallout.
This is first they blew this bubble, and now they're going to deflate the whole debt in 5 years. That's what I think that they're intending. And you've seen the Deagel numbers, and whatever you think of them, but Deagel themselves always maintained that they thought that financial.
For anyone that hasn't seen the Deagel numbers, what are they?
Yeah, the Deagel numbers were a projection of the population of Western populations, and they predicted that the United States would go down from 300 to 100 million inhabitants, and the United Kingdom from 60 million to 15 million. So that's genocidal. That's depopulating, and they're simply looking to completely pummel the West. That's what's coming.
Yeah.
And the West has been in massive decline over a century already, because in 1900 about a third of the world pop was Westerners, so white, and then currently it's only 9%, and our population is also very greyed, and also about a quarter of most European peoples have been already replaced by migrants. So these are all very grave signs of huge decline, and we're now facing a coup de grace. That's basically what's up.
Okay, well. That's not a very positive prognosis, but the reality isn't nice, is it? So the bankers are sitting astride the mountain and empire of debt that they've created, and they're trying to move us into a deflationary period as a counter to this inflationary period we're in at the moment.
And then you must understand that inflation and deflation are just simply two routes to hell. And the obvious, what we actually need, obviously, is stable money. There's nothing complicated about this.
We'll get to that now. But before we get to that, let's just focus a little bit longer on deflation. What is the mechanism? How, in the way that we know how they inflate the currency, they simply, print me more money, and more money gets printed out digitally or paper. It doesn't really matter. It's the concept we're talking about, isn't it? But we know how they inflate. How would they deflate? What's the mechanism, the tools, the methods they'd use for that?
Besides usury, because the main purpose of my website has always been exposing usury and promoting interest-free credit as a solution. But another key purpose always has been exposing the coming new gold standard. And this is counterintuitive for many people who read in the alternative media, because it's all libertarianism, and they promote gold as currency. But
they promote gold specifically because gold is very difficult to inflate, isn't it?
Yeah, but then libertarianism also sells deflation as the solution to inflation. But inflation and deflation are two banker devices, and it's a completely controlled opposition. And deflation is terrible for the common people, and will lead to depression. And gold-based money is deflationary as hell. So we have had 50 years of inflation with this debt bubble that has gone totally out of control, and this must be stopped. And everybody will be happy with gold to stop this money growth, because everybody now understands that this debt growth and this credit bubble is insane, must be stopped. So gold. Grand, that's
the solution that's presented,
but it will lead to a terrible deflation and depression.
Yeah, and so how does a gold standard? So if we've got trillions and trillions of debt, and the bankers are saying "fuck you, pay me, that's my money, give me it back," right?
Yeah.
How would gold satisfy that insatiable desire of bankers for more?
Well, we must be realistic at this stage. They own it all.
Yeah.
So and
I mean, the Rothschilds have set gold price for the last 250 years on a daily basis.
Yeah, and the first thing that the Bank of England did when they were founded was dump the tally sticks that the English king used as money in
interest free, wasn't it, as well?
Yeah, it was just that free money that was created with these wooden sticks. So these were the tally sticks, but the first thing that the Bank of England did was create a gold standard. Yeah. So that's how much bankers fear gold, like the libertarians like to say. Yeah. The gold money is banker money, and it's used to create deflations. And the fiat system was created to create inflation. But both are banker devices, and what we need is stable money. So. And how does it work? I mean, fiat money can just be printed at will.
Yeah.
Gold cannot. So that's how they will stop money growth.
I see. Yeah. So they'll just switch the economy from a fiat-based economy that's not backed by anything other than the good faith and credit of the people.
Yeah.
And they'll switch it to a gold standard.
Yeah.
So currency will now be pegged and tracked to the price of gold. And a dollar will be, reimbursable for the same amount of gold, roughly.
Something like that, because you can have gold standards in very different guises.
Yeah.
But the core of the monetary system will become gold again, and you can already see it happening because the ruble has been soft pegged to gold since the invasion, basically. So,
but hasn't that kept the ruble stable despite the attacks upon the Russian economy?
So, the ruble collapsed after the invasion, and now it's back on a 7-year high against the dollar, and it's now higher than before the invasion. So. In that respect, it works, and you can also manage for a while with a gold standard when you have plenty of gold. But when you look at gold purchases over the last few decennia, then you will see that especially America and Britain seem to be very low on gold, but especially Russia and
China,
particularly China,
stocked up,
are totally loaded with gold.
Yeah.
And they've been buying gold while the Fed has been suppressing gold prices. So that's. Would
you say that's like a prophetic move by Russia and China? They know what's coming, therefore they're stocking up on gold.
Yeah, they know because but you shouldn't be optimistic about that, because these China and Russia are also controlled by the same people, and they are using China and Russia now to basically annihilate the West. And you can also see that this new gold standard that is coming, that could well come from the East.
Yeah.
So
okay, interesting. Okay, so they're kind of some of the problems we face, and they seem insurmountable. They seem like what you said. They've got the monopoly board well and truly sewn up, haven't they? But there are solutions, and there is hope. But there always has to be hope. And you're working on something that does provide some hope for people.
Yeah.
And possible ways and ideas. You've got an interest-free currency now. I read a book called The Banking Swindle by Kerry Bolton.
Yeah.
Fantastic book. Great historical jaunt through governments and the people's struggle against usury.
Yes.
And usury being unearned income or, interest on money. It's difficult for people to get their heads around because it's an alien topic that's not discussed in any of our public discourse. But in that book, he charts the struggles that we've had against usury and the various tools, techniques, and methods we've used against the banks in order to try and push back at some level. There's historical examples in places like Guernsey, even Germany, and other countries try to do interest-free money, allegedly.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how I stumbled on your work and your blog, Real Currencies. And since then, we've obviously chatted a lot about that. Now, you've got an interest-free currency which you run in the Netherlands.
Yeah.
I've been talking to you about that for quite a while, and we lost touch during lockdown. And this is, we've hooked up again now for the first time in maybe 18 months. And first thing you said is the currency has got a foothold.
Yeah.
So tell us about your currency, what it means, and how it's doing.
Yeah. The best thing would be that that Western states circulate superior money than we have now, and that would be the best, because if the government just creates a decent money supply, that would be the best. But they're not doing that because they're in the bag of the creditor. I mean, all Western states have to borrow from the bank, so the bank is the boss in the West. It's as simple as that. So that's not going to happen. But there's nothing stopping us really of creating our own currencies, and the main stumbling block, there are two big stumbling blocks. In the first place, a really thorough analysis of what we need in future money for the 21st century. The current interest-free currencies that we have worldwide are half-baked, and I don't mean that in a mean way, because I just want to stimulate them to become even better. But they're not good enough. For instance, many of these interest-free, either they can provide interest-free credit, or they are convertible to the dominant currency. And the Florijn is basically the first currency in the world that is both convertible to euro, because we're here in Euroland, and capable of providing interest-free credit. So we create money which is convertible to euro. And this is a huge breakthrough. And it's as simple as this. If everybody in the Netherlands would start using the Florijn, we could refinance all debt. And we could give everybody an interest-free mortgage. So no more landlordism, which is also a really very negative way of running your real estate market. Everybody should be able to own his own home. That's basically what we should want. And this would be possible. We could refinance national debt. No more usury, because usury, what is usury? Simply lending at interest. That is what usury is, and that is what banking is. And that is the problem, lending at interest. Usury is the core problem, and we need interest-free credit, because the only solution to interest-bearing credit is interest-free credit.
Okay, so being devil's advocate here, why is it in my interest to lend money for free?
You wouldn't be lending money for free, because our foundation creates the money for free. Because the simple fact is this, and this is one of the nastiest memes in the alternative media. In the alternative media, it's always about money creation. That this is the problem. That banks create money, but what people must start to get is this: the banks create all the money with simple bookkeeping, basically for zero cost, because it's an ultra cheap mechanism. Next, they lend us a mortgage, say 200K mortgage, and with normal interest rates of 5%. Last 15 years, we have had very low interest rates, but that's because the debt bubble is end of life. That's not the normal situation. Normally speaking, in capitalism, you have 5% interest rates. And that means that if such a 200,000 mortgage costs you ultimately about 250 to 300,000 in usury over the 30 years that you're paying back. So you pay back to 200K and you pay 200 to 300K in usury. So obviously it would be very much in your interest as a borrower, because this is also very important. You must not think as a creditor. We are debt slaves, okay? We're not interested in stories why people need usury. We're interested in how do we get rid of this usury, because we're the suckers that pay for it. You know, that's what we need to get in our minds. So the productive people, working people, they need interest-free credits. Only bankers need usury.
So with the Florijn,
yeah,
you said it's convertible to euro.
Yeah.
So it's convertible from an interest-free currency to a usury-based currency.
Yeah.
That transfer, is there some problems with that? How does that work? Is that so you can trade internally, and then when you need to interact with the system,
Exactly,
you can swap it? Yeah.
What you always have in this kind of system is an asymmetric allocation of the funds. So at some point, some businesses will have been making more of this unit than they can viably spend in the network. And if you're not convertible, then they must stop accepting your unit, because you know, if they can't viably spend them anymore, they have no interest in taking them in.
Yeah.
So then and these are your most successful players also, because they're the ones making all the turnover. So what you need then is a decent exit for them.
So it's convertible to euros. What about is there a limit to how much can be produced? You know, for instance, with a Bitcoin, 23 billion would be, or million would be produced.
There's no hard limit like Bitcoin, which has a maximum of 21 million that can be mined. But obviously, the value of money is a function of the volume of money compared to the value of the transactions in the economy. So it's obvious that if you and I start a currency and we print $1 million and I spend that with you, that's going to go nowhere. That money will be worth nothing, because there's simply not enough economic activity between the two of us.
Yeah.
So the economic activity in the network decides how much money you can create. And therefore, this is also our main challenge then, because we now have 2,700 participants in the Florijn, which is fantastic. Yeah. But we need far more, because we need to create a lot of money to have more added value for the participants, for the users of the money.
So in this situation then, inflation, which what you're saying is that the Florijn can be inflated to whatever is required.
Yeah. With stable prices.
Right. Okay. So that's what I was going to say. So inflation is not an issue if usury it doesn't exist.
Yeah. Well, if there's a clear relation between the inflation of the money supply and the growing transactions in the economy.
Yeah.
So that's more money is real power.
So I see. So the more transactions there is, the more liquidity is required from the currency in order to make sure that everything moves smoothly. Yeah. And that those two are related to each other.
Exactly.
Yeah. So the transactions determine how much liquidity is required from the currency.
Exactly, and in the decent monetary system, this is also why Bitcoin, this 21 million max in Bitcoin is simply a bad idea. What you need is a flexible money supply that can be stable in terms of the amount of money versus the value of the transactions in the economy. That needs to be stable. So if the economy grows, the money supply must follow the transactions in the economy. And this is the other way around in the economy now, because what they do now is they print money to create economic growth, and then they create a deflation to create a crash. That's what they do now. But then the monetary impulse drives the economic situation. In our system, it's the other way around. The economy grows on a natural level, and our money supply follows this economic growth.
Right. Usury. How do we? So if usury is the fundamental root cause issue of the monetary system in the West currently, inflation, deflation, it's all, noise to hide the true problem, which is usury.
That's a core issue,
That's
usually.
the core issue, right? So previously, for instance, in Islam, usury is banned. I don't know if that's true or not, but
Yeah, very much so. Yeah.
and it was in Christendom for 1,000 years. It was punishable by death, I believe. I don't know.
Well, yeah, you wouldn't get a Christian burial. So, for instance, in the medieval Europe, you had 1,000 years of interest-free economics. But the problem was, I'll first tell you what the problem was. Why we had 1,000 years of interest-free economy, and in Britain in 1500, so at the end of the interest-free era, a working man in Britain had to work only 15 weeks to feed his family per year. So he had the Catholic calendar had 200 holy days. So this was the standard of living in the late medieval Britain. And then what you had we all know how it ended. I mean, capitalism came on the scene, which started with the founding of the Bank of England in 1694.
So before the Bank of England was established in England, for instance, there was no interest-free currency, and man was required to labor a lot less.
Yeah. Because our standard of everybody's telling you that capitalism made us rich. What really happened is that we worked 15 weeks per year in 1500, and when Britain ruled the waves, when it was on the top of as an empire, your forebears in Britain had to work 100 hours per week in the mines and the sweatshops, and often that was not enough. They had to bring their women and children as well. So that's what really happened in capitalism. That's what capitalism really brought us. So and the capitalism.
When you say capitalism, are you defining capitalism as being a function of usury?
Yeah, totally. I mean, there are all sorts of silly definitions. Like I said, we're being manipulated with language. So they will tell you there are free markets in capitalism. We had free markets long before we had capitalism. We don't need capitalism for free markets. They say it's the private control of the means of production, without telling you that it's a minute group of people that own the
monopoly, isn't it?
It's a total monopoly. Everything in capitalism is organized in cartels, and all these cartels are owned by the same people as well. So it's one mega monopoly, and it's this mega monopoly that is now tending to world government.
Okay, so England had a long, glorious interest-free period, which was ended with the regicide of Charles the first and only time in English history that regicide, the killing of a king, has ever occurred, because apparently Charles resisted attempts to establish a usury-based bank, which eventually, upon his death, the Bank of England was created. After they brought over William of Orange from the Netherlands. Thank you very much for that contribution to English history. Right, and then
You're welcome.
They established the Bank of England, which was a usury-based banking system copied from the Whistle Bank in Amsterdam. And then that allowed the British Empire to
That's what basically started the British Empire, because all these empires were run by the bankers behind the scenes. You have this famous quote of Rothschild, "I care not who's on what puppet sits on the throne of England or whatever, as long as I can make the money." So somebody says,
as long as I control the money.
And that's the way it is, and that's how it was in Amsterdam before, because that was the first fully fledged capitalist empire.
The Whistle Bank was the founder of the central bank system.
That was the core central bank at the heart of the Dutch economy, and that was behind the VOC, which was the which were you had the East Indies Company. We had something similar in Holland.
The Dutch, what was it called? Yeah, it'll come back to me.
Yeah. which occupied Indonesia, and then the Bank of England was the bank that brought capitalism all over the world. Later it migrated to the United States, of course. And what you can clearly see, I mean, the British Empire was dominated by the city, and at the center of that, the Bank of England. And in America, it's dominated by Wall Street, with at the heart there, the Federal Reserve Bank. That's what controls the American economy, nothing else. And these banks, these are the imperialists.
So if in the Florijn, you have interest-free currency, but, in the rest of society or the world at large, we live amongst a usury-based currency. And previously, it was the law that kept usury under control.
Yeah.
Which that law was,
Thou shalt not take usury.
Yeah,
that's what the Bible says. You will not take usury of your brother.
Didn't the Calvinists bring usury back into Christendom?
Yeah, Calvin played a very negative role because he said I don't consider usury forbidden among us. That's what Calvin said, and then you had Calvinism in Holland and Presbyterianism.
But in a private agreement, if you agree to my terms, isn't that what we want? A private law rather than the government intervening, or does usury need to be controlled by a third party, i.e. the government, in order to ban its use? How do we square the circle between wanting freedom to trade and needing muscle to prevent the loan sharks?
I'll tell you what happened. In Europe, there was usury prohibition, but there was no mechanism to provide interest-free credit. So this is what went wrong. And as a result, there was credit scarcity in the economy. And if you read the texts of these people like Calvin, but also a man like Francis Bacon, they very clearly point at this credit scarcity in the economy. So what they should have done was pool the savings of the working people and use that to loan each other. Yeah, and to loan that to each other interest-free. That's what they should have done, but they didn't. They let in the moneylenders again. And this is how usury came back on the scene in Europe. First in Italy, of course, with the Renaissance, but later in Northern Europe. And but now we're a couple of hundred years later. And this was really a very wrong path that the West got into. But nowadays there are several mechanisms with which you can create all the credit that you will ever need as a society at cost price, which is really ultra low. So we can have interest-free credit by bookkeeping. This is how we create money in the Florijn, and the bank does it the same, basically, because this is really so key to understand. If the banks create all the money interest, with bookkeeping,
why can't we?
Why can't we? and also, then we shouldn't solve that. Then the problem is not that they create money. The problem is that they make us pay through our teeth for what's basically just a bookkeeping trick.
It's amazing. So it's like, people think, this is another, I spoke to Richard Grannon about this in an interview I did with him, and we were talking about money creation and stuff, and I haven't talked about these subjects for a long time, so it was good to, warm up again. And I told him about the Bank of England, that the Bank of England was nationalised in 1945.
Yes.
But yet the directors of the Bank of England are private.
Yeah.
So we don't know who the Bank of England directors are, yet it's a nationalised company.
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah, it's crazy.
And if the Bank of England is a nationalised company and it's creating our currency, why is it charging us interest?
Yeah, crazy.
And who is the interest going to?
Yes.
So why are we paying for our own money to be created by this company that's meant to be nationalised? What's your take on that?
I say excellent questions. Yeah. I would like an answer too.
It'll be a long time coming, that one, I think.
The only real answer is that people have not been paying attention.
Yeah.
Because this is the issue, the bankers have ruled, the moneylenders and the money changers have been ruling humanity for thousands of years now. And the reason why they get away with it is because people only think in terms of money, in terms of how do I get more of it? How do I make it till the end of the month?
But that's because of scarcity, isn't it?
It's scarcity, but it's also a lack of awareness.
Yeah.
So people don't realize what money is, that somebody creates it, that it's a beast of the law, and not some natural force. And that we can have a say in how it's created. And this is the challenge for humanity. We need to come to terms with what money is, and a very simple fact is that the money must be a means of exchange, which is as effective and cheap as possible, just as any other product. Every good tool is cheap and it is good. And that is what we need of our money too. Our money now is insanely expensive. In the first place, we pay about 10 to 15 trillion per year in usury to the banks. worldwide. Crazy amount of money. So that's only the usury. We also have these inflations and deflations. I'm the only one in all the West who has ever tried to calculate what the damage of the credit crunch was. And my superficial calculation puts it at 50 trillion in damages of the credit crunch. All these people should have been hung a long time ago, but they're still in charge. And then this is because people they simply don't get it.
Well, economics is probably the most unsexy subject of the lot, isn't it? It's not alluring as such. It should be. It should be the most important subject of all.
Yes.
Because there was one thing you said to me years ago, and it always stuck with me, which was all policy is economic. So if you don't control the economic policy, you don't control any policy. No, because the government are given a budget, and each department is given a budget to manage. Ultimately, you can only do so much with what money you're given, isn't it? So that for me was like, okay, that was a really profound, insightful quote. And that until we have control over our money supply, as in the people who contribute to the money supply, the people who use their labor to create the currency to begin with, until we have control over that as a people, as a nation, everything else is just like moving chairs around the Titanic.
Totally. And these money lenders rake in all this dough, but it's not just that we're enslaved by this usury, and we are total slaves of usury. What we were just discussing about these working hours, that's very important to keep in mind. But it's also a huge windfall for them. So what they do with that? They start buying all these politicians. They start buying these scientists, these media. They start floating these ridiculous ideologies to just distract us. And then we start fighting among each other about that stuff. And that's all keeping our eyes off the ball.
Yeah.
And we need to refocus again. It's all about the money, always.
Yeah, and I think, with usury, I think there's a cultural and a behavioral thing that is really important as well. It's because it brings out the worst in humanity.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because when we're in a position of scarcity, yeah, when we think we're in a situation where the resources that we require to survive or flourish are scarce, then the worst elements of our competitiveness come out, or our worst vices can come out as well.
Sure, for sure.
So with usury, I think a good analogy is how they make diamonds scarce. What's the name of that company in
De Beers?
De Beers, right? De Beers sit on a mountain of diamonds, and they're not inherently expensive or rare. It's just that because they control the flow of the diamonds,
They keep 90% off the market.
and the marketing makes it desirable.
Yeah, with the fashionable rings. And,
So they control the price of diamonds, and I'd say that usury has the same effect over money.
for sure.
Yeah, and when we think money is scarce, or if money is scarce, then we fight each other harder, in order to get what we think we need. So I think not only does it have the effect, the social, economic effect of, destroying our business and not allowing us to live in, prosperity, it also affects peace, love, and harmony.
Totally. I mean, you have this famous film on the internet, All Wars Are Banker Wars, and that's just a fact, These guys finance always both sides. And there's always enough loans for war. There's never enough loans for something nice for your family, I mean, you don't get money for that. And, and this is a very spiritual thing as well, Lawrence, because I don't want to bother people with Christianity. I know it's not very popular at the moment, but let me put it very bluntly. In Christianity, the law of Christianity is that you must love your brother like yourself and God with all your might. That's the law in Christianity. And the opposite of the law is the love of money is the root of all evil. That's a very famous quote.
The love of money is
the love of money is the root of all evil. And Jesus says at some point, you cannot serve two masters, because you will either serve our Father or you will serve Mammon. And Mammon is then the materialist domain, the money domain. So these are really juxtaposed against each other. The love of each other or the love of money. And my colleague Michael Hoffman, who wrote a famous book, Usury in Christendom in the United States, a famous populist in the United States, he put it very brilliantly. He said, usury is the weaponization of the love of money. So the guys who love money, usury is how they get a lot of it.
That's the tool they use, yeah.
Usury usurps all the wealth, and this is another thing. Usury and usurpation, they are etymologically the same. So through usury, all the wealth of the world has been usurped. And with all the wealth, all the power. Because wealth and power are two sides of the same coin. You cannot be a slave and free at the same time. You cannot have a few scumbags walk away with the whole thing, right? Really, because that's what we're facing now. And
I think because that's it, isn't it? But when we talk about freedom, and it can be cliched, can't it, as well, right? And well, what actually is freedom, really? What is it that we mean when we say freedom? Well, we mean freedom from slavery. We don't mean freedom to do whatever we want to do.
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
It's actually freedom from slavery.
Yeah.
And usury is one of the key tools and mechanisms
Totally.
to enslave us. Because if you have to work 2 days a week to pay off the interest that doesn't exist, then you're not free, are you?
At all. And think about it like this. Usury is also the foundation of all making money with money, all the unearned income.
Yeah,
because in capitalism, working is for suckers. I mean, the cool people, they make money with money, but they say we make our money work for us. Have you ever seen money work?
No.
No. It's just a mechanism for us to work, and they rake it all in.
Passive income.
Passive income, unearned income, and the richer you are, the higher your income is.
Yeah.
Because if you have a million, you make 50,000 per year. If you have a billion, you already make 50 million a year.
Yeah.
If you have a trillion, and we have people who have a trillion, you already make 50 billion per year in usury and unearned income.
Yeah.
It's always 5%, something like that.
So it's not in their interest to end usury ever, is it? Because that's the ultimate mechanism for them to become rich and stay rich.
Yeah. And they've conquered the entire place with it. It's as simple as that. And what we've been doing, because we've been pretty stupid, we've been looking, we need to get rich as well so that we can also make money with money.
But isn't living in this world, in this society that, resources are scarce, or so we're told, and we have to compete with our fellow man in order to elevate ourselves from various positions of poverty? Do we have to compete at some level, at least while this is the system? Until we can create a utopian ideal of an interest-free society where the currency is made for and by the people, what do we do?
Yeah, well, there are two things. In the first place, you need to become a little less self-obsessed. It's one thing to say, okay, I want to elevate myself from poverty. That's all good and dandy, but there are certain rules that you need to abide with, because it's not just forbidden for bankers to take usury; it's also forbidden for all of us.
Yeah,
and the Quran says very simply, a man who takes usury is at war with God. You can dislike Islam. I don't care about that. The Bible says exactly the same thing. So usury is a war of God, a war of an act of war against your brother and the Creator.
A sin that cries to heaven for vengeance. It's called, isn't it?
Yeah, and at some point, we all have to report upstairs. And if you're then saying, oh well, I had a good time taking usury, that's not something that's going to get you very far up there. So that's a good thing to keep in mind. And there's also even if you don't buy all this stuff, in the spiritual stuff. It's also about if you're a warrior, if you see what's going on, focus less on becoming rich, because that's really a very low purpose, a really very carnal purpose that doesn't make a very much of an impression with the likes of me anyway. How are you going to help your fellow man? How are you going to help reform this system, which is purely predatory, instead of trying to share in it? This system is against everything and everybody you love. Do not partake in it. Because
the scarcity is a false idea. There's an abundance out there, isn't there? There really is an abundance. It's just that it's hoarded amongst this tiny cabal of people.
Totally.
So that we can't get our hands on it or get near it. And that
Totally.
creates this bullshit scarcity that we're fighting against.
The problem of unearned income is there is no production associated with it. It's only a redistribution of wealth. So these people who make the most money, they add nothing to society. If everybody just consumes what he produces, everybody will be in an affluent position. Economics, like you said, is a very soulless science. It's more politics than science anyway. But one of the reasons is because they define economics as how do you deal with scarce resources. If you look at what is economics from an interest-free economics perspective, it is how do we share the abundance of nature in a decent way among each other. That's totally upside down. There is abundance. We can create everything we want. Mahatma Gandhi, Mahatma Gandhi.
Just say Gandhi.
Just say Gandhi, exactly. He famously said, "There is enough for everybody's needs,
Yeah.
but there's not enough for everybody's greed."
Yeah,
And it's as simple as that.
Yeah, good shout. Yeah, very good shout. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about political ideologies and ways to combat usury. Where I'm from, Liverpool, it's a socialist stronghold. You could even go far to say it's a communist stronghold. And I bucked the trend in Liverpool. A few that I don't identify as a socialist. I maybe did when I was younger because I thought that was the political vehicle in order to defeat the elite that seek to impose, their will upon us or enslave us.
Mhm.
And as I've got older, I've learnt more about communism and the dark side of it and stuff. Now, one of the main cultural ideas in society at the moment is that socialism and communism is the opposition to capitalism. It's the only ideological opposition to capitalism. But as far as I'm aware, socialism doesn't deal with usury, doesn't even talk about it.
Exactly.
Yeah. So would you say that's a false paradigm? What are
Totally.
your thoughts on Marxism or Marx and socialism and communism as this alternative?
Yeah, so we're getting programmed to think either you're for capitalism or you're for
Yeah.
and if you're not for capitalism, then you're a commie.
And the other way around as well.
And that's what they're telling us. It's all crap because the bankers control both communism and capitalism, and it's even worse. Capitalism, Marx himself said this, capitalism is a revolutionary force that inexorably leads to communism.
Mm-hmm.
So if you hate communism, and if you have any sense you hate communism, then you must avoid capitalism, because what happens, all the wealth comes in the hands of a very few people, and then they start consolidating this in the state. That's what they do. And
but isn't it better in the hands of the state than in the hands of the cartel capitalists?
Not if the state is in their hands, and it is, because if the state has to borrow from the banker,
so the capitalists end up buying the state, which becomes the communists.
Totally, because these bankers, they lend to states.
Yeah.
And what happens when they lend to states? If you're the British state and you go to a banker, to Rothschild, and you say, "Give me 50 billion more to keep this show going," he will say, "Oh, that's grand, but import a few hundred thousand more Africans, teach your sons to become trannies, do this sustainability crap." That's what they're telling the governments. And these are the conditions under which you get these loans as a government, being a government. The governments don't even want to do this. They're forced to do this because otherwise they don't get money from the bank.
Yeah, that's interesting, because that's one of the things I've read about BlackRock. We can probably talk about BlackRock in a minute. Is BlackRock, who is run by Larry Fink. They own, between 4 and 15% of most corporations in the world, and have such a dominant role in the boardroom that Larry Fink will, monthly or annually write a letter to the CEOs of all the companies that he has a stake in and say, he runs something called the ESG, which is environmental sustainability governance, right? And it's almost like a league table. Yeah, that the companies or the corporations that are influenced by BlackRock through shareholder control are judged by where they stand in the league table of the ESG. Now, because BlackRock gets interest-free money from the Fed, gets free money from the Fed as much as it wants, whenever it wants, them CEOs of those corporations, if they want a cheap loan off BlackRock via the Fed, then they have to comply with what Larry Fink wants them to do, which is what you've just described. And, we see Pride Month at the moment, don't we? Where for 1 month, all these corporations,
woke capitalism.
It's well, what's going on? But when you know that these corporations are being persuaded to comply with this policy, because if they don't, they won't get the free money that Usury has got control over through the Fed and through BlackRock.
Absolutely. And another famous example is Mark Carney. He's the former boss of the Bank of England.
Yeah.
He's now in charge of, for the central banking cartel, in charge of sustainability agenda. And he's also saying, listen, if you're a big corporation, if you want money, you need to go green. Simple as that.
So it's not decision made by companies that is to do with productivity. or even profitability.
No.
It's if you want more money to sustain the debt that you've got to maintain your company, you have to comply with our policy. Yeah. Now that's not capitalism, is it?
It is This is what capitalism is, actually, but this is not what people were minded
It's not
to
free
believe.
markets capitalism.
You know, we're told that capitalism has something to do with free markets, but it's banking.
Yeah.
We need to get rid of this idea that capitalism is somehow something good.
So I want to go back to communism though, because that seems to be a very dominant ideology across the West at the moment, and it seems that a lot of our governments are socialist.
For sure.
And Marx himself said that democracy leads to socialism, and that socialism leads to communism. I feel as if we are in some kind of transitional stage from democracy to socialism. You know, we're sold this idea in the West that socialism offers a counterpoint to capitalism. But I want to bring it back to that and how that ties in with, you know, WEF and the Great Reset and BlackRock, Vanguard, all these guys, you know, we were very, very, very rich, seem to be moving us towards some kind of a technocratic, based socialist global rule. What's your take on that?
Yeah, well, can only underwrite what you're saying. That's what they're doing, and the world state that is coming is going to be communist. And if you look at Agenda 2030, one of the things that will be done away with is private land holdings, for instance. Well, that's about as communist as it gets, and everything will be centralized in the world state. And what's going to happen in the West is we're going to have a terrible depression. It's going to be completely. I won't say it's going to be as bad as Deagel suggests. That's hard to believe, even for a very optimistic kind of guy like myself. But the least that you can say of it is it's going to be something like the Soviet collapse. And if you know what happened there, all these pensioners that had been working for the Soviet state for 40 years, they ended up with nothing and they froze to death in their apartments. Already now you hear that in Germany, people will be going cold this winter already because of rising gas prices.
Because isn't that deliberate to clear out, you know, the useless eaters, as they like to call us? Look what happened during the pandemic. And in the nursing homes, Malazadam, I think it was called, you know, they were killed off.
For sure.
Thousands and thousands of people. Nobody talks about it. Nobody's outraged about, you know, what they were doing, which is, you know, form of genocide. You know, and they were cleaning out the useless eaters, weren't they? You know,
and that was only just a shot before the bow. What is coming is going to hit the entire West, and what that will do is that will prove to everybody that capitalism can't work, and it can't work indeed.
But we don't really want to be able to say "I told you so" when everyone's dead.
Well, that's what they will be telling us. Yeah, well, look what happens if you let capitalism go wild.
Yeah,
and then they will of course say that the solution is capitalism is not interest-free credit, but communism.
Yeah,
that is what they will use.
They'll use the damage caused by capitalism to usher in this new era of technocratic socialism.
Yes.
Which leads to communism.
But again, we all, you know, if you do,
why do you think that the working man, like people in Liverpool who are working class people, you know, generally speaking, why do you think the working man across the world is so indoctrinated or is so intoxicated with socialism as this tool for our liberation?
Well, let's face it. I mean, if you're a chanceless wage slave. And you're working away 40 hours a week and for basically nothing, just enough money to pay the rent. And let's face it, as a man in the West, you can't even support a woman anymore these days. So people would like to see something else. And also you saw this with the lockdown. You know, why was so much support for the lockdown? Because people hate the wage slavery. Nobody goes to his work because he likes it there or because he actually believes that he's doing something useful. Yeah. I mean, everybody understands that it's just making shareholders rich.
There was something beautiful about the lockdown, wasn't there? In the sense that, you know, we seen nature get a rest from humanity for a short period. There's no traffic, you know, it was peaceful. You didn't have to go to the wage slave office, like you said. So there was something about it that was quite peaceful. But the only way they were able to maintain the lockdown was to buy people's silence.
Yeah.
The furlough schemes with the billions they probably lent from the banks in order to shut people up while they said there was no work.
For many people in the West, a basic income sounds very promising.
Yeah,
that's the brutal reality. And
I mean, a universal basic income.
Yeah, because that's where they're heading with this.
Kerry Bolton talks about the universal basic income as being a traditional tool that governments have used to combat usury. That in some instances it's been positive.
listen, I'm not against giving people a small handout just to survive, because it's much better than having them die in the street.
Yeah.
But we must realize that it's all about making people dependent on government.
Yeah.
And also that it's just basically a small handout for people who have been disowned from everything.
Mm-hmm.
If you have a usury-free economy in which you can support your family with 15 weeks per year, and in which also most men will work for themselves, because that was also the reality in 1500. What wage slavery that we have now is a function of capitalism.
Mm-hmm.
And before capitalism, men worked for themselves. They were small farmers, they were craftsmen. That's how they survived. And they worked 15 weeks per year. They were the owner of their own home. They were the owner of their own tools, of their own workshop. Nowadays, people own shit. I mean, they
Well, you will own nothing and you'll be happy.
but most people already own nothing. You know, so the middle class is now complaining, but the brutal reality is that the middle class has for decades and centuries defended the plutocrats who were oppressing the working poor. So the middle class also has a bit of soul searching to do on this one, and it's now the middle class that is going to get disowned, and now they start complaining. But you know, the working class has been complaining for centuries already.
No one's listened.
And nobody's listened.
Yeah. But see, I think that's one of the reasons why Marx has been so successful in, you know, garnering the attention of the working classes, because it felt like for the first time there was an opportunity, that there was a vehicle, an ideology, a system that enabled us to take back what was stolen from us. However, like, you know, Orwell, you know, brilliantly depicts an Animal Farm, the truth and reality of that is far apart.
Communism does nothing for the working man.
But I've heard
soul as such.
I've heard the you know, the statement that Marx was right about his analysis of capitalism, but the tactics he you know, he endorsed for reaching the overthrow of capitalism were, you know, revolution, mass murder, you know, genocide,
collectivization.
But what do you think about the idea that Marx was right about capitalism?
In terms of the entrepreneurial part of it, that's absolutely correct. And how the bourgeoisie suppressed the working class, that was absolutely 100% on target.
Yeah.
And then his solution was to collectivize everything in the state. So that's cancer. But the key thing that Marx made away is that ultimately all the possessing classes in society ultimately are controlled by usury, because landlords are suppressed with mortgages. Businesses need business loans. You know, so
everything is on the inflation or deflationary cycle, isn't it? You know?
Absolutely, and they all need cash from the bank.
Yeah.
So at the top of the food chain, there's always usury, and this is what Marx ignored. And if you don't see that the top is usury, then you can also not understand that interest-free credit is the solution.
Well, why would he, for a man that spent his life in the British Library, you know, researching and writing his magnus opus on, you know, economics, for a man who wasn't an economist, how did he overlook usury? It's the elephant in the room.
Yeah, okay. I always say that Marx was a ghostwriter for Rothschild.
Right, okay, yeah. So you know, that answers the question then, doesn't it, quite simply?
That's just the way it is. These people, you know, so they first rob you blind, and then they give you the so-called solution, and that's what they did with communism.
Yeah, okay. So that's the ultimate controlled opposition.
Totally. And they have us by the ball so strongly, you know, for like I said, first they rob you blind, and then they also tell you what you want to do about it. I mean, and this is what we need to escape from.
Because, you know, Marxism as a cultural weapon seems to be quite pronounced. And we're feeling, you know, a lot of the, you know, worst parts of this society we're in now appears to be a push from the cultural Marxists, whatever that really is. But the economy is more Keynesian rather than Marxist, in that Keynes promoted, you know, inflation as the solution to all economy's problems. But that be called neoliberalism rather than a Marxist doctrine?
You know what neoliberalism really was this. Like I said, this death and debt growth it goes like this. And in the beginning, it's just because you must understand that if you have higher debt, you have more interest payments, and the percentage of GDP that goes to interest payments starts growing.
Yeah.
So in the early stages, it was hard to see, but in the late 70s, early 80s, it already began to really bite in GDP. So a larger and larger part of GDP was going to usury and other forms of unearned income. So that's where all these rationalizations in government budgets started coming from, and why wages in the West have been starting to get suppressed. What you have been seeing in neoliberalism, because of this debt growth and because of the percentage of the GDP that goes to unearned income has been growing, a smaller and smaller percentage of GDP remain for labor, basically. So and that's what you have with neoliberalism. So neoliberalism was about keeping this going as long as possible.
Yeah, the inflation.
Yeah, the inflation.
Yeah. So because that's I only learnt about Keynes recently, last 12 months or so, and so I always thought it was a Marxist economy, but it's not. It's a Keynesian economy, isn't it? Yeah, and that's the main driver of economic policy in the West.
Yeah.
And not much is talked about that, really, is it? And you get a lot of people on the libertarian side of things, like Safadine Ammous, I think is a brilliant speaker, and he is a libertarian. He is an anarchist. He is a Bitcoin maximalist. Yeah, and he speaks a lot of sense, right?
Yeah.
And he exposes the history of central banking like you do. He doesn't talk about usury, or maybe he does in a coded manner. Yeah, because it's dangerous. And he is making a lot of noise at the moment. And he did a podcast with Lex Friedman. Have you heard of him?
No.
Big podcaster, like Joe Rogan, different style, bit more of a nerd than Joe Rogan. But he had Safadine Ammous on recently, and it was a 4-hour podcast. It was the longest podcast I've ever seen, other than Joe Rogan's with Alex Jones. Right, so it was a bit more serious than the Alex Jones podcast. But he went through the whole 9 yards. He went through. He's an Austrian economist, and he went through understanding Austrian economics, which he explains quite well. And he talks about Menger and Mise and Hans Hermann Hoppe, who I really like. What do you think of him?
Yeah,
again, he's an Austrian, so he's one of the bad guys.
Yeah, like I said, one of the main purposes of my blog has been exposing the coming new gold standard, and libertarianism and Austrian economics obviously has a high interest in promoting gold as currency, and also in deflation, which is just another banker device. And this has been a big concern of mine, and I have had a massive polemics with the libertarians in 2012 to 2014 or thereabouts, which had a huge impact in the truth movement at the time, because I was exposing the problems of Austrianism, because we're sick and tired of this fiat system, but then the inflation of the fiat system, according to Austrianism, has to be solved with deflation, which is total cancer. I've just explained to you that the Great Depression was a total deflation, and we're heading for deflation, and it's going to be genocidal. So Austrian economics sells us a banker solution, and this is very painful. And the key thing about Austrian economics is that everything is explained away with the free market. If there's a free market, it's all going to be grand. But what they ignore is that the filthy rich will always have huge power in the market. And all these monopolies, they are not a function of the state. They're a function of plutocracy and of huge market power by the rich. And also, key, these unearned income schemes, landlordism, usury, that's all fine in the view of Austrian economics. They all see, they see all that this will so-called all go away in the free market. It will not go away in the free market. If we don't have interest-free credit, you will have unearned income in the economy. And that's what we need to get rid of. And Austrianism not only ignores it, it defends it.
Okay, that's going to be an interesting debate that I'd love to host sometime. So any Austrians out there,
I'm ready for it anytime.
I'm up for being an impartial host. But where I was getting to with that talk about Safadine Ammous is that he is a really good advocate. Yeah, I like what he talks about, and I think he's a genuine guy. I don't think he's trying to, manipulate anyone. I think he's, he believes what he says.
Yeah, fair enough. Fair enough.
And he's a big advocate of Bitcoin, and we haven't touched upon crypto yet.
Yeah,
I feel as if now's the time.
Yeah.
Right? So we're currently seeing a huge crisis in the crypto sphere because we've seen a collapse of Bitcoin, and because every other crypto is pegged to Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Everything else has collapsed with it.
Yeah.
You know, I've hold a bit of Bitcoin myself.
Yeah.
I feel as if I'm holding the bags right now.
Yeah,
right?
it got burned.
Well, not burned because you get burned when you sell, don't you? You know.
Yeah.
Right, so I'm holding a bit of Bitcoin at the moment, and I'm going to have to avoid the charts for the next few months. So what's your take on, I think, another hot topic other than inflation right now is the crypto crisis. First of all, why do you think Bitcoin has collapsed in the dramatic manner it has over the last couple of weeks? And what are your thoughts on crypto, at least as a store of value?
Well, in the first place, crypto started rising in the aftermath of the money printing in March 2020. So if you look at the chart of Bitcoin, I think it was maybe at 20K 2 years ago, and then it started rising dramatically. And this was simply because there was huge money printing by the Federal Reserve.
So why did the money printing at the Federal Reserve mean that Bitcoin price went up? Because more people were buying it?
Because it was a speculative asset, and it's in the financial economy. So when there's money printing, part of that money goes into crypto.
Yeah.
And that's what happened. It exploded in price, went up to 60K, 67, I think it was at some point, 67K for a Bitcoin. And then the Federal Reserve stopped printing money, which was about, say, mid-2021. And then slowly the deflationary forces in the economy came back, and this started especially to bite late 2021. And that's when you see that all paper assets started declining because the Federal Reserve had stopped inflating and was now deflating. They were now tapering and they were now raising interest rates. And what you see is that Bitcoin has proven not to be a hedge for these circumstances. Bitcoin has shared in the decline of all the paper assets, of all the financial assets in the economy. So,
because that's what we were told at Bitcoin, wasn't it? Is that if you buy Bitcoin, then you hold it like savings. And traditionally, savings before the introduction of usury or of inflation maintain their value. So when you wanted to liquidate your savings, it was worth the same as what it was when you originally bought it, because otherwise it wouldn't be useful as savings, would it? Right. So we're told that Bitcoin had that function. It had the ability to be a savings device more than anything else, not a unit of trade.
But you say that now about this not as unit of trade, but originally it was presented as a new means of exchange, a new form of money. But Austrianism and libertarianism, they see money primarily as a store of value. Interest-free economics says money is a means of exchange, full stop. We're not interested in a store of value in interest-free economics, and most certainly not in speculating with the store of value.
Okay, so let me just stop you there. So if interest-free economics is a medium of exchange only, what in an interest-free economic system, what do people do for investments and savings?
So there's a very legitimate desire to have value now and not consume it immediately, but consume it in the future. That's the core. What you really.
It's a human desire, isn't it? To store something for a rainy day.
So that's. But what when it goes wrong is when you start saving money, because money is a means of exchange. And a store of value and means of exchange are very opposite functions, and they're opposed. Because the simple fact is, if I hoard a unit, it can no longer circulate in the local economy. It's as simple as that. So either you have a good circulating means of exchange or you have a good store of value. You can't have both.
Okay, so if you don't have both and you separate those functions, what would you recommend as the store of value?
So if you have an interest-free economy with a highly effective, ultra-cheap means of exchange, including interest-free credit, what you use the money for is to buy stuff that does have value, because the means of exchange in itself is worthless. It's just a means of exchange. It has no intrinsic value, but you can buy stuff that does have value. So your home, your workshop, the tools that you use for your trade, that's what you invest your money in. And you can later liquidate that. For instance, if you retire, you can sell your workshop. Or even, this is real assets. This is what I'm talking about now represents real assets. And that can be used as collateral for loans, for interest-free loans. So if you need cash, you can do two things: either liquidate or use it as collateral for a loan. And that's how you transfer wealth to the future in an interest-free economy.
Because the Austrians, at least, say that money is an asset, and that you should be able to rent out money as you do other assets. If I rent out a house, I can get a fee for it, and that's how I secure my investment. So what are your thoughts on renting out money as an asset?
That's anathema in interest-free economics. You must produce if you want income,
Yeah.
not rent seeking.
But isn't that just an ideology rather than,
No,
if you were
no.
a pragmatist, right?
No,
You
no,
didn't
no.
care about ideology, you know.
This is not ideology. The
Yeah.
simple fact of the matter is that in this world, we must produce to eat.
Yeah.
Nobody can deny this.
Yeah.
And what we need in a society is that everybody puts in his share of the effort required. We cannot have a few dudes sitting there on the side playing the big sirs and the big barons and what have you, doing nothing, adding no value, but raking it all in with usury and land rents.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we cannot have. That's what we call parasitism.
Yeah.
And lazy people. We don't like them. Everybody must do his share. And that's not ideology. That's just basic common sense.
So in an interest-free economy, renting money for a fee would be outlawed.
Well, not really outlawed, because that's what we had in the medieval era. But nowadays we have interest-free credit, and it's very simple. In the future, you will have a choice. Either you go to a bank for a loan at 5%, or you go to an interest-free credit facility at 0%.
It's a no-brainer, isn't it?
I think most people will get that right, Lawrence.
But what about what about if people don't pay it back?
It's very simple. I mean, there's a contract. It's a serious loan. It's not charity.
Yeah.
It's business.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't pay back, we liquidate your collateral.
Yeah. So it's a secured loan.
It's a secure for the bigger loans, for mortgages, etc. There's always collateral. Otherwise, we can't do the loan.
I see. Okay. Okay. I think we've kind of exhausted the interest-free angle. Is there anything else that you want to talk about?
Yeah, there's one thing I want to talk about, because everybody's obsessed with the Great Reset.
Okay, yeah, that's a great subject. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So and I have my framing of that, and
everyone seems to be quite obsessed with this topic now, don't they?
Yeah.
It's a really hot button.
Yeah.
And Klaus Schwab and his fantastic costumes doesn't make it any easier.
These guys came on the scene 2 years ago suddenly, and obviously everybody was freaking out. You will own nothing, and you'll be happy, etc. This bullshit, and how everybody needs to stay home and work online, and
Eat
children
bugs, sleep in the pod.
This is the Great Reset that they're promoting, and what this is all about is people having nothing, and being happy about it. Apparently, the first part is clear. You will have nothing, that's for sure. But the happy part, I'm not too sure about. Yeah. So, what I think is interesting is that in the first place, this World Economic Forum, this came into my attention only recently. The World Economic Forum was founded in 1971, and there was another famous event in 71, namely the closing of the gold window and the start of the fiat system. And this is very interesting, because not only did the World Economic
So in 1971, we ended the gold standard and entered totally into a fiat,
yes,
which is backed by nothing.
Yes, and that's when the debt growth started.
Yeah.
And then when the debt bubble is at its peak,
yeah,
and starts leaking, and they need massive money printing to keep it going, then suddenly Klaus Schwab is there with his Great Reset.
Yeah.
So, the World Economic Forum seems very closely related to the fiat system. And the debt bubble can end in two ways. It can end in a crazy inflation by keeping it going as long as possible. That will end in a crazy inflation. Or it can be stopped and it will end in a deflation. Both are fine for the bankers. And what I say is that there are two factions. The one promoting inflation, and that's the Great Reset, or what is coming, deflation. And I'm pretty sure now that the Great Reset is failing, and I think it was designed to fail. The intention was always what is going to happen, which is deflation. But and I have had this impression from the beginning, for the very simple reason that Klaus Schwab and Bill Gates are not very believable saviors.
No.
They're more caricatures, more freaky, Bond-like villains. So
I mean, they literally look like somebody has created their characterization in Hollywood, don't they?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's so cliche.
It's just creepy. So nobody's going to follow these guys.
No.
So they're more like good to scare people.
Yeah.
If we continue this, it's going to be the Great Reset with Uncle Bill and Uncle Klaus. That's not what we want. So
do you think it's a distraction?
Yeah, I think their main purpose was scaring people into the desired direction. Because I think the World Economic Forum is about keeping the inflation going, and they're failing. You can see everywhere that people like Justin Trudeau here in Holland, Mark Rutte, Macron, not to mention Uncle Joe in the United States. These people are loathed. They're despised. There's no support whatsoever for what they're saying.
I don't think any one of them has actually won a democratic election. I think it's all rigged. It's all totally fixed, you know.
I'm pretty sure the elections in Holland were also fixed.
Yeah.
In France, it was just on TV, just as with Trump. You saw that Le Pen had less million votes, and Macron had 8 million, and suddenly he had also 11 million. It was just on TV.
Yeah.
And it was the same with Trump. You know, his mega victory was on TV in Germany. So everybody saw that Trump won, Le Pen won. Here in Holland, we also have populist opposition that got far too few seats in Parliament. So this is going to get exposed at some point. And you know, you can also predict when it will happen, because we've been hearing about these cyber attacks.
Yeah. Or is it Project Polygon?
Yeah. And these are there have been a couple of exercises for these cyber attacks. A couple of them in Zion, in Tel Aviv, and under the auspices of the World Economic Forum. And the result of this cyber attack scenario was that the banks in Wall Street would have to merge to fend off these cyber attacks, so-called.
Yeah, consolidate the monopoly.
Consolidating the monopoly, but especially also these banks have to be merged because they are broke. The banks are broke because it's very...
How can they be broke if they create money out of thin air?
Yeah, well, you know, they create money to lend it to us.
Yeah.
But now they have created this mega debt bubble, and it can never be repaid.
Yeah.
That's the problem. And this was also always the intent, let there be no doubt, because the banks are going to fail in the years ahead, and they will use that to consolidate everything in the state, because they want communism. But this is why the banks are bankrupt, because we can't pay. And
because that's all they lend it on, the strength of the ability of the government to reclaim it from the people through taxes, through other bullshit means that they use to extort the people, which is ultimately our labor, isn't it? That's all the only thing that provides any wealth in this world is our labor.
Totally.
And their entire system is an elaborate ruse to take our labor from us one way or another.
That's the sole purpose of the financial system.
Yeah.
And this about the failing great resets, it's not just me that's saying this. The other day, Mr. Vladimir Putin came out with an interview, and he said that he expects a change of elites in the West in the short term. So
a change of leaders.
Of elites.
Of elite, right?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
But he literally said that he expected rightist and populist governments to take over power in the West.
I mean, that's been threatened for the last 10, 15 years, but it seems that the control they have over the ballot box, even in the desperate ways they are displaying it, because rigging elections in the way they're doing it, it's so obvious, isn't it? So that means that, that means that they're desperate if they're going to be so obvious about the crimes that they're committing. It kind of implies that, you know, their grip over power is not as all-compassing as it appears to be. It feels like maybe, you know...
I take even a grimmer view of that, because, you know, and you know this is...
You must be a great guy in parties.
Ultimately, we will win. Let there be no doubt, but it's going to be a bloodbath.
Okay.
But and you know this as well as I do, that there is no left and right.
Of course, it's bullshit. It's
all bullshit. It's all.
I mean, populism. I wouldn't know whether I'd define that as left or right.
Real populism is true.
It's from the people, isn't it?
Yeah, but the populist leaders that we have all support banking.
Yeah.
That's a simple fact. Trump is not going to do anything against the bank. No.
But not just that. You know, he enriched them further, didn't he, during his reign? Yeah.
All these mega bailouts started under Trump. That's also something that people ignore. But all the money was printed under Trump. And the media did not attack him even once about it. That's also something to think about.
Yeah.
So normally speaking, they should have, you know, everything should have been about the money printing. But there was not even a line written about the money printing.
Didn't Trump make some noise about auditing the Fed? And didn't he, you know, Jerome Powell, wasn't he in like a break in the normal, you know, recruitment of a
so-called, but what really changed?
Yeah, nothing. Yeah, totally.
Nothing.
Yeah. But do you think though that it was rather than Trump being, you know, just another patsy, is that by saying things like audit the Fed and putting Jerome Powell in place, does that not imply that he attempted to do the right thing, but was defeated in an internal coup.
The petrodollar is now imploding, and the Federal Reserve presided over the debt bubble, and it's basically end of life for the Fed.
Yeah,
I wouldn't be surprised if with these cyber attacks that there's going to be a huge cleanup, or at any rate a supposed cleanup.
Do you think the cyber attacks have any influence over the current crypto crisis? You think there's a market manipulation going on there? Because it's funny, isn't it, that Uncle Klaus warns us about the pandemic, and then the pandemic comes, and he conveniently has a book called COVID-19: The Great Reset, just in time. And then he warns us about Project Polygon, which is the cyber attacks. Then all of a sudden we start seeing cyber attacks. This man seems to have more vision than Jesus Christ. What's going on?
Yeah, if you make the plans yourself, then it's easy to predict them, man. So that's not so hard.
Write the script yourself. That's probably the key, isn't it?
And these central bankers themselves, Jerome Powell and Christine Lagarde, they literally tell us in our face, oh no, financial crisis, that's not going to happen in our lifetime again. But cyber attacks, that's the main threat of the financial system, and that's simply what's going on is this debt bubble is simply imploding. That's why they needed to start printing money. They can't really maintain that, so they have to fix that.
So are they going to fix the debt bubble by using a cyber hack to wipe out the debt?
Well, at any rate,
sounds like a good idea to me.
It's going to be to give them the excuse to clean up, to write off certain debts and to wheel in the new monetary system, because that's what's going to happen, and to shotgun marry some of these biggest banks, and let there be no doubt it's going to be the biggest banks in Wall Street that are going to be broke.
But this new monetary system that you just mentioned, which we haven't really discussed, is one of the things that is coming through the culture at the moment and through the media is this idea that part of the motivation of the pandemic was to defeat cash as a medium of exchange, and to introduce government-backed cryptocurrencies in which the actual credit was programmed so that you can only spend it on whatever's authorized by the government to use that credit for. Was that the new currency that you're talking about?
What you're now talking about is the central bank digital currencies. Yeah. And that's where we also can go back to crypto, because let me give you my basic critique of crypto, and especially Bitcoin being the main crypto, because it's not all cryptos are the same, and you can use blockchain to create decent currencies, but Bitcoin is associated with mindless speculation. And it's really very simple. You cannot fix banking with mindless speculation. I mean, that people can even buy into this is crazy in my view, but that's what happened. Secondly, Bitcoin cannot provide interest-free credit. And we've already said that the only solution to usury is interest-free credit. So Bitcoin is simply not going to work out. It's as simple as that. But what did Bitcoin do? It created a cashless electronic currency, which is in many respects quite reminiscent of what they have in mind with the central bank digital currency. And of course, the naive people will tell you, oh, the central bankers have learned from Bitcoin. I'm not a naive person in that respect. I've studied banking for a long while already now. So already in 2014, I wrote an article, Bitcoin is paving the way for a global cashless society.
Catherine Fitz, I forget her name.
Catherine Olsen Fitz.
Yeah, shouldn't she have a similar position as that?
I'm not too sure what she says about crypto, but she's very critical about central bank digital coins, of course. So
but she says that about Bitcoin is your prison.
Yeah,
yeah. So I think it's a similar angle. I didn't read the article, but I read the headline. But keep going.
The fact of the matter is, they created the blockchain, and let me also say this: blockchain is all about so-called transparent registration of everything. And that is really very Agenda 2030.
Everything that you register is on the public blockchain, doesn't it? Your health records.
Everything is going to be registered and can therefore be data mined and be used and to control everything. Because that's why you want to register everything, so you can start controlling everything. And that's why it's so very Agenda 2030. So this whole crypto scene, and let me put a very clearly here. I'm not looking to quibble with Bitcoiners because most Bitcoiners are out there because they want something against banking. So they have a very positive intention. But they get manipulated with all these ideologies. And I'm here to explain how it really works. But I'm not here to alienate these people. I'm just here to explain what we do need, and what we actually need is interest-free economics, no speculation, and only income through either entrepreneurship or ordinary labor. And that's a decent form of income, and not all this making money with money tribe, and certainly not speculation and usury and all this stuff.
Okay, fantastic. So we're coming to the end now because I'm running out of battery on my phone.
Okay, well,
this is an impromptu setup that we've done outdoors. I haven't done a podcast outdoors before, and we've just made a system work, and it's been fantastic chatting to you, Anthony. Amazing meeting you. I really, really enjoyed it. Where can people find you online if they want to hunt you out?
realcurrencies.wordpress.com, and for the Florijn, www.betalenmetflorijn.nl, but that's Dutch. So that's only interesting for the Dutch listeners. But
what about, have you got any social media?
Twitter, but I mostly tweet in Dutch these days.
Okay.
So.
Okay. Okay, cool. Well, it's been fantastic, and I hope to come out to Belgium and Netherlands again, and we can, continue this conversation.
Looking forward to it already.
Yeah. Have you got any last words that you want to say to our audience before we wrap it up?
Yes. The Great Reset is not going to be it. It's going to fail, and what they want us to do is celebrate this failure and hope that we will fall for what they are actually planning, because what is coming is what is their real plan. And with the coming cyber attacks and with the coming doing away with the Great Reset, they will install some sort of a gold standard in whatever way, shape or form. And this will start this terrible deflation that we are facing. And what we really need in the local economy is local currencies, interest-free currencies, so that, as you said perfectly, so we can bring in new liquidity in the local economy. That's what we really need. Don't celebrate the death of the Great Reset, because it's only going to be replaced with their real plan.
Okay. Anthony, it's been a fantastic time speaking to you, and I look forward to speaking to you again soon.